Welcome back to Just Make Stuff. Today we're continuing the process of making a duplicate of this cable sleeve jumper that I knitted a couple of years ago. If you saw the last installment of this process, you will have seen that we examined this jumper quite in detail to see about stitch counts and construction methods and details. And we noted those down in my knitting journal. So we have notes on this side about what we know about how this jumper was made in the first place. And then I put in a few notes as well about things I knew I wanted to change for making a duplicate of this jumper. So today we're going to take the information that I already have gathered and turn it into an actual usable pattern, because it's one thing to be able to read the stitches that were used in making the jumper in the first place, and it's another thing to translate that into a functional pattern, because there may be details that you miss when you examine a jumper. There may be things like stitches that were created and then merged together too quickly for you to notice, or rows that you miscounted, or other such things. So today we're taking the information we already have, and we're going to start with the cast on. Originally, what I counted was an 83 stitch cast on. Now that seems quite strange. That's not a stitch count that I want to replicate in recreating this jumper, because that is an odd number for one thing. And normally when we are working with anything that is in a ribbing pattern, we would work with multiples of the rib. So this jumper features 1x1 rib on the neck and all of the other ribbing locations. So we're going to go for a multiple of 2. The other thing that I notice on this jumper is that the neckline is very wide, and because there's no shaping, it ends up sitting a bit awkwardly on the body. Now, I know that I wanted to add short row shaping anyway, but if I add the short row shaping, it will raise the back and lower the front of the neckline, but it won't do anything about the width. So what may end up happening is that I may end up with something that's too wide for what I want. So what I think I'm going to do is reduce this stitch count. Let's cast on 74 stitches. And we're going to work in 1x1 rib, which is the same as the initial neckline. So we're going to cast on and work in 1x1 rib for 1 inch. And now we have our note about short row shaping. I want to put some in, but the first thing that I need to know is how I'm going to divide these 74 stitches across my raglan. So I have a diagram from the original raglan shaping. So let's draw another raglan diagram. The thing that struck me as odd about this when I was taking the pattern down from the jumper itself is that these cable sleeves, when I got to them, I could see that they were an 8 stitch width cable, and they start all the way up at the raglan. They begin immediately. However, if you only have 6 stitches going into an 8 stitch cable, you have to immediately begin increasing separately from the raglan just to get those cables in. So I think something that will make a little more sense in the first place is to say that let's have these be 8 stitches each. If these are 8 stitches each, that will be 16 stitches. We'll take 16 away from 74, which is our total stitch count. So then we have 58 stitches to go across the front and the back. So 58 divided by 2 is going to be 29 stitches even. There's so much maths in knitting, and a lot of it is very basic. And you very quickly learn that when you're knitting, you lose all ability to count and do basic sums. This is no one's fault. This is not your fault. This is what knitting does to people's brains. So 29 stitches at the front and the back. I don't actually love that. I would rather that it was 28 stitches. I like, it's doable because this is a raglan. You might end up with an uneven number of increases, but aesthetically, for the sake of creating this pattern, I would prefer for these numbers to be even. So let's say that we do make them 28 stitches. Change it and change it back. If I'm going to take those 2 stitches out, I do need to just reduce this initial cast on to 72 stitches. So we have 72 stitches. That makes for 28, 56 plus 16. Let's make sure that adds up correctly. 56 plus 16 is 72. Yes, do double check your maths there, Jess. Okay, so if we're going to have 8 stitches on the raglans, we're going to have 28 stitches on the back. Let's label this. I really should label it the same way as I labeled this other one. So front, back, sleeve, sleeve. Now, if this is going to be the back and we're going to have short row shaping, when we do short row shaping, the thing that it does is to push the back up, which kind of in consequence lowers the front neck of the jumper. So if we were to go too narrow on the beginning, if we were to only start with a few stitches in the middle of the short row shaping, we might end up with a kind of lump where the back of the jumper almost raises up in a bit of a hump and then evens out going around the neck. So you don't want to go too narrow as you begin your short rows. I am going to say, let's start with probably half of this number that we have at the back. We have 28 stitches. Insert stitch marker at center back. Short rows begin. 7 stitches either side of the center back marker. Now let's determine how much we want this to rise up. So if you have your gauge measurements, you should be able to see how many rows is going to give you an inch in depth. We want the front of the jumper to be at least an inch lower than the back. So if we're looking at this, we already know from last time that there are about 10 rows in this ribbing, which was an inch deep. So it should be about a 10 row depth in order to get 1 inch. I would love for there to be 1 to 2 inches of shaping, one to 2 inches of difference between the front and the back due to the short row shaping. So if we're looking for 20 rows, we would need to have 10 rows of knit and 10 rows of purl, meaning 10 turns on each side of for the short row shaping. If we put them too close together, they might give a very sharp curve there. If we put them too far apart, they're going to end up being so shallow that you actually end up with some of the turns on the front half of the jumper, which is not what we want. We want to move that down, not up. I'm just going to write in short row and put a 7 either side. So that leaves us with 7 stitches here and 4 stitches here. So that's a total of 11 stitches across the back side from the beginning of the short row and the back half of the sleeve. If we do a turn every other stitch, that will give us 5 knit turns and 5 purl turns, which will make for a total of 10 rows depth, which would be bringing up the back of the jumper by an inch. That's probably enough. I mean, that's definitely enough to be the short row shaping, but it's one where it might be that I want it to be deeper than that, in which case I would need to tear it back and try again. So in the first instance, as my kind of try it and see on the short rows, I am going to say, let's just put in short rows. Knit 7 from center back marker, turn, purl to 7 stitches past the center back marker, and then turn, work to 2 stitches past previous turn, turn. And to me, that makes sense. You might need to write out your short row instructions a bit more clearly. And then I'm going to put this in with little asterisks and say repeat until 5 turns have been worked on each side of the neck or each side of the back. And that should be enough for my short rows. The next thing is the raglan. So I need to work the increases either side of each raglan marker every other row, but I also have to start the cables on the sleeves. This is one of the things that is more intuitive when you're working it than when you are writing up a pattern for it. So I'm just going to write in here, be sure to establish cable pattern while working the raglan. It will be that I work 7 stitches this way on the knit row, and then I turn and I work back 7 stitches past the middle, turn, work back and work 9 stitches past the middle, turn, 9 stitches past the middle, 11, 11, and then 13 is the last one before the raglan, and then back to 13. And then this is where it becomes complicated on this kind of 4th row of the short row shaping. I would work across to here and then work the first raglan increase. And then I would work the turn and come back across here, work the first raglan increase and then the short row turn, work back across, making sure that after this raglan increase, that I would be establishing the cable pattern and then doing the turn. So the cable pattern at this point where you first encounter it will only be that it's 2 purl stitches and then knit stitches. So it's not complicated, but it will seem that way because you're going to be working the short rows and the raglan at the same time. So for this, I think the most clear thing will be when I make this pattern, because I'm going to be making videos about the process of making a duplicate of this jumper. I am going to try to do that in vlog format so that you can see exactly how I've done the problem solving on writing up this pattern. Now, I think the other details are very similar to what we already have. So we'll have the cable pattern, which I still have not made the chart for, but I will make the cable chart. And basically, you just work the raglan and the cable chart for the sleeves at the same time through the length of the raglan. And then we will continue the raglan to about 10 inches. I think I am going to cast on a few stitches at the underarm And I do want to do just a little bit of shaping. So one of the things that I find about this jumper is that it can have a little bit of a bulge almost at this point where it switches from stockinette to this 1x1 rib at the waist. And I don't know how visible that is now, but I think it's because the jumper is simply too wide, and that was because of this error that I made initially when I was doing the sleeves. So I'm going to try to make sure that it's not so wide to begin with. And I also probably want to extend this stockinette panel a little bit farther this time, because I like this wide section of 1x1 rib, but it is just a little bit too wide for me. So I'm probably going to cut out about 2 inches. So that will make for about 6 inches probably of stockinette before we begin the 1x1 rib. And that means that for every inch, I can do just a little bit of waist shaping every 10 rows. And that won't give a lot of shape, but it's enough of a subtle difference that it can change the way that this looks on the body. So we're going to say knit stockinette until 6 inches from underarm. During this time, we'll do the shaping. And we'll probably just do a 4-stitch decrease. So as if it were that you had side seams and you do a decrease either side of each side seam, as it were. And that is actually what I'm going to write. Knit stockinette until 6 inches from underarm join. During this, decrease 4 stitches on side seam, meaning 2 stitches each side for every inch of stockinette. I'm just going to put that under the heading of waist shaping. I find that headings are one of the most useful things in patterns. I always love a pattern that has plenty of headings and subheadings, so I know what I'm going into. At that point, we would change to 1x1 rib. And I don't know exactly how long that will go for. To tell you honestly, I don't have a specific length in mind for this. When I made this pattern originally, when I made this jumper originally, I simply knitted until I used up all of the yarn. So I will probably do something similar this time. Right, we've done the next step of translating this jumper into a pattern so that it can be remade. These notes are enough that I can follow it. And if you are copying a jumper yourself, you may find that your notes that you make at this stage will be enough for you yourself to make the jumper that you are replicating. However, if you want for this to be useful to anyone else, there is another step that has to happen as you then make the jumper, and you take all of these and turn them into a logical progression of steps, a clearly written pattern. So that is what we will be doing next time on the Design Diaries series. I am going to be using this yarn to make a replica of this jumper. And that may take a while because I'm going to need to actually make that jumper. I will try to film it as I go, but I'm very, very excited about using this yarn. This is Malabrigo Rios in the color Wales Road. I have the tag here. And so this is a superwash merino, which does mean that when I wash and block this when it's finished, it will grow. And that is something I remember from when I made this jumper initially. It did grow considerably on first blocking. So that is something I need to take into account in choosing my kind of sizing for this pattern. But I'm very excited to continue this project, and please join me next time for the next installment of Design Diaries.